Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go. My name is Donald Kimball. I am the communications manager for Washington Policy Center. Thanks so much for joining us. This is our weekly update during the legislative session, talking with our research experts as to what's going on in the legislature, bringing you the latest, what you need to know, what bills are moving forward, what policies are enacting. Today, we are going to be talking with Mark Harmsworth, our Center for Small Business Director, over a couple of bills. Um, Notably, there are about more than 20 tax increase proposals. There's a bill about child protection safety online that actually has some really bad negative outcomes associated with it, as well as the House voting to increase, or excuse me, to increase your rents by way of rent control. So we're going to talk about all that. As a reminder, if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, like and subscribe. It really helps us out, helps our message get out there. We really appreciate it. And if you're watching this live, you can use the Q&A function to ask questions of Mark, and we will get to those. That's, again, the Q&A function. There's also a chat, but it's a little easier to see if you use that Q&A function. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome on Mark. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with the child protection bill for online safety. You have written about this. There's been some changes and updates to it. Is the bill fixed? Tell us a little bit about what this bill would do, how it was originally, what's changed, and what maybe is still not so great about it.
Well, thanks for having me on, Donald. Yeah, the bill number for those that want to look up the whole thing is a Senate bill. It's 5708, and it was originally introduced, I think, because I don't know, assume intent from the lead legislator in this case, to clean up what they consider to be addictive social media feeds. So, as you are on TikTok or you're on Facebook or Twitter, whatever, and you engage in a post, that information is picked up by the social media platform. And then, so if you're, let's say you're a car guy or a car girl, and you like looking at 67 Chevys, if you start looking and clicking on 67 Chevys, you'll start seeing more classic cars. And I need a new wallet right now, so my feeds are completely full of wallet advertisements. So that's what they consider to be an addictive feed. And the idea behind it is that they engage you longer in scrolling, that death scroll of doom, and you stay engaged in the post, so you see more ads, and of course the platform that makes more money. So this bill originally was to address that specifically for children, because they didn't want to create an addictive feed for a child and then get them addicted into social media, which in principle, yeah, we don't, absolutely, that's a good thing to do. We don't want our kids addicted, but it's just the right way to do it. However, there were some provisions in this bill. One of them was a parental notification, for better word, banner that popped up on the child's screen to say mom and dad were watching them while they're on their feed. And then the second provision well, actually, there were several other provisions. One of them was that the social media platform had to somehow divine the age of the child by their behaviors. If you've ever been to a liquor site or some restricted site and it asks you if you're 18, everyone's 18 when they go look at those sites. And then the third thing is the location data for that child. And, there's a lot of issues with that.
So as I recall, in particular, the second point you brought up there, the parental monitoring notification, right? Telling the kid, hey, your parents are seeing what you're scrolling through. You'd highlighted this, and now it's been removed. Is that correct?
Yeah, after we put out some material, I think it was last week or the week before,
Yeah.
Senator Wagner introduced it eventually ended up being a striking amendment, a striking bill. So it replaced the entire bill. It wasn't just an amendment, but they removed that provision because it was obvious that if a child was doing something maybe a little untoward, or in a situation that might happen, is they were being groomed by somebody online, for something the parents wouldn't necessarily want, then they're obviously going to do it with a big red thing across the top of the screen that says, "Hey, mom and dad are watching you." So they removed that provision, which is good, but they did leave in the restrictions on location data, which I have concerns about, because if a child, based on the laws that were passed last year and the year before, decides we know the state can take a child and put them into care, the location data would have enabled a parent figure out where the kid was. That isn't the case. So that's still in there. I'd like to see that taken out so the parents can get that location data, because ultimately it hides the child from the parent, and that may be the only avenue they have to find out where the kid is, if because they're not going to be able to get to GPS data or anything like that without going after the phone companies, and by then it's too late. So I'd like to see that taken out as well.
Yeah,
And
at a
we'll see what
fundamental
happens.
level, it just feels like this is completely undermining parents' authority over their kids, right? Because on the one hand, initially it was trying to say um, kids have this, right to know that their parents are monitoring them, whereas, from my perspective, no, parents have the right to monitor what their kids do. When a kid is online, when a kid is scrolling through a social media on the internet, that's a privilege their parent is granting them. And so,
Yeah.
of course, the parent has the right to know, to take that away, to monitor, to control. And secondarily, even more so, the location. Now, I think there's always a healthy balance of sort of helicopter parenting and always monitoring and and letting your kid have their autonomy and freedom. But for the state to absolutely deny parents the any level of them making that decision of where that line is or when that line is, that seems like a huge overstepping of the state's authority to me.
Yeah, and additionally, there's also a provision in there that the social media platform decides which privacy controls are on, unless there is a legitimate reason for them to be off. And again, why is the social media platform doing that, not the parents? So, overall, this bill probably the wrong way to fix this issue. Maybe it's talk to your kids, but
Well,
um, ultimately, it's just not the right way to go.
I completely agree. And one of the things is I think that again, let's assume best intention. What we were talking about in the beginning, sort of regulating these addictive feeds. I think that there is this common sort of hand wringing from people and skeptics of addictive social media or electronics or games or whatever it is. And there's right to be concerned there, right? We don't want to sort of let kids unregulated go into this, become completely absorbed. There is definitely studies that show these kinds of negative effects that this can have on the brain, but there's this hand wringing as if the companies aren't going to respond to consumer desire to control for that. They act as though these companies are just going to go all in unregulated. And I remember I was having a conversation with a friend who was kind of trying to make this point, saying like, look, this is why the free market fails, is because these companies have no incentive to prevent you from staying on their phone forever. And I laughed because I said, no, that's actually wrong. In fact, every modern smartphone has like a Zen mode, a lock yourself out built in. Every modern smartphone has a parental control limit for apps. You even see things like Nintendo adding applications that let you limit the time of a particular profile on your video game console so that it has a time limit that you can set. You can see the monitoring as the parent. All of these companies are responding to the parents who have now sort of caught up with the technology, realizing we need to assert control. So the market is again solving for this in a better way than I think the government can, because it's giving the authority, the power, and the information to parents who can then make those decisions. This seems like a really big hammer that's sort of crudely smashing in nails and hitting a few thumbs on the way from the state.
Yeah, but now I've answered the question of why my Pong shuts down after 10 minutes when I'm playing it. So thanks for that, Donald.
I have to limit you on those late night pong sessions.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. And I have to say also, this just makes me mad. I am just returned
Mm,
from paternity leave, so as a new parent, I'm already thinking about this stuff, and I'm already getting worked up over it. So, thank you for at least partially curbing the negatives of this bill. Hopefully, we can keep momentum going and stop the rest of this bad stuff from being
yeah,
implemented.
let's hope so.
Okay, so let's move on. You also wrote a blog called Taxes, Taxes, and More Taxes, plus some more taxes just in case, which highlights 20 of the numerous tax increases that the legislature is considering this session. As of the time of writing it, all of these, and as of now, I think still, all of these are on the table. They can be resurrected at any point. Um, what is your feeling in terms of, is this unprecedented? Is this kind of a new energy towards increasing the taxes? Do you think there's appetite in the governor's mansion to pass some of these? How many of these taxes seem feasible? How many of them are just kind of like hero bills? People sort of morally grandstanding. What's your take on this? Because hearing that 20 tax increases sounds like a lot, but maybe this is business as usual in Olympia.
Yeah, there's definitely an extreme amount of taxes this time. I think also we've got a new governor with Governor Ferguson, and he's kind of pump the brakes on some of this stuff. I mean, he warned the majority party, his own party, in his State of the Union speech at the beginning of the year that he wasn't going to start jacking up taxes. I mean, they're talking about this big deficit spend. Now, remember, when they talk about this 10, 12, 15, depending on who you ask, $1 billion deficit, it's not. That's the increase they're asking for. So when they say they're going to save 4 billion, they're saving 4 billion off the increase they're asking for. Really, as the Republicans have just come out with this morning, you can do this without tax increases and live within our means. What a concept. So, what I do see though is I think a lot of these bills, when they were originally introduced, the feeling was we're going to better introduce these bills. We've got supermajority in the House and the Senate, so we're just down. We got a new governor that's on our side, and we're going to better run these through, put into the leadership in the Senate and the House. And I think a lot of these, which is why you've seen so many, but a lot of these aren't going to make it because of the comments of Governor Ferguson. So, yeah, some examples like removing the 1%. I don't say if these are going to pass or not. These are the ones that were introduced to the removing the 1% cap on property tax increases, property taxes on financial assets, $2 on every single electronic device, which I've written about several times, over 250, a 6% Airbnb tax, 0.5% sales tax increase, a wealth tax of 1% on everything you own over 100 million, which I'd love to own $100 million in assets, but you know where that's going to go in a few years. They'll just drop that down to something more painful. Real estate excise tax increase of half a point, B&O increase of up to half a point, depending on your NAICS code. County council taxes, taxing CEOs at a higher rate because they make too much money. It's so bad. Increase the real estate tax on property sellers again. 300% increase to the real estate excise tax affidavit fees, expanding document fees, 0.1% local sales tax. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and including the Discover Pass. If you want to go walking, that's going up in price too. So, will these all make it? I don't know. I think some are hero bills like the B&O tax. I don't think that's going to go through. It was just too complex, and we need reform there, not just a whole change in taxes. Taxing CEOs at a higher rate, that is so arbitrary. I mean, what is, the CEO of Boeing versus the CEO of, mom and pop, a strawberry shake store down the corner. I mean, really? But I think some of these smaller ones, like the real estate excise tax affidavit fees, some of the other ones, they could pass. And all of this has to be out of the House by tomorrow or the Senate by tomorrow. But as you know, these things can always be resurrected.
Do you have a sense of maybe not the what the legislature would pass, but what Governor Ferguson might sign? Because like you said, he's been sort of reticent to endorse tax increases, although at least in his rhetoric, it sounds to me like he's leaving the door open, right? He's not saying no tax increases. He's saying it would be a last resort versus cutting. Um, but I also think that he might be a little bit more thoughtful about the kinds of tax increases. I get the sense maybe that he might be a little bit more hesitant to do things that would drive up housing costs, for instance, because that seems to be a focus area of his. Whether or not he believes sort of the analysis of things like the property tax limit increasing real estate, I don't know. Do you get any sort of sense of that? Because the governor's mansion and the legislature seem sort of ideologically diverging when it comes to their sort of brand of tax increase or policy in general. There's overlap for sure. Do you get any sort of sense, or is it a little too early to say?
I think the governor is trying to distance himself from the previous administration, so he's not wanting to necessarily they say this is the fourth term of the Inslee administration. So I think he's doing that. I also think, and this is my personal opinion, that he won't go for some of these bigger tax increases like the wealth tax. That's just not going to stick. Because if you're that wealthy, you just leave the state. I mean, it's
Right.
really simple. And then you get no tax revenue from anything that individual would have been spending or investing in the state. So the stuff like that, I think he'll avoid. My suspicion is that he'll let some of the lower taxes go through, the ones, fee increases, those types of things, because they're under the radar. But at the end of the day, he can always stand up there and say, "Hey, I'm against all these taxes, but the majority, party passed this as part of their budget, so I'm going to have to sign it. I'm not going to veto this as part of a bigger package." So he can always distance himself from this from a political perspective, from a policy perspective. I think they should be looking at where they've increased the spending in the last 10 years, where it's doubled in the last 10 years, and what do we have to show for it?
Yeah. Well, and again, it's so important that what you mentioned earlier, again, when they're talking about these deficits, when they're talking about cuts, it's always cuts of future increases. That's just so critical because when the debate is shaped around, oh, you want to cut, you want to, have all these destruction of government employees and services and jobs, and it's like, no, we're talking about reducing things that don't even yet exist. So don't let, if you're having conversations with people or you hear this, don't let that debate be framed in a way that is deceptive, because again, this is all about our revenues are increasing. It's not like Washington all of a sudden has had an economic downturn in terms of
Right.
the revenue coming into government. And so that's what makes this list of 20 taxes even more ridiculous, is that we already have higher revenues than we did before and before and before.
Yeah. And if you look at just using it as an example, Sound Transit, and there's a spending focus issue in the transportation space where they're taking their money and they're spending it on stuff that they shouldn't be, and instead of focusing on fixing the potholes in the road. So, several years ago, they created Sound Transit as an agency, and we're funneling billions and billions of dollars into that for a train that carries 0.2% of
Right.
the trips or whatever the percentage is. It's a very small number. um, you know, Community transit here in Snohomish County, we subsidize each rider by about $38 per rider. The average rider on the Sound Transit orange and green lines is 1.78 riders per bus. We subsidize the train $178 per rider. These numbers are not, you can't refute these. These are easy numbers to figure out. You take the operational cost and you divide it by the number of riders. And that doesn't even include the capital repayment cost of over $100 billion to run 13 miles, and it took less than that to get to the moon back in '69. So you see this wasted money that's going on, and then they say we don't have enough money to fix the roads. Really? You just spent $110 billion building a train system that carries a very small percentage. Why don't we fix the roads first, and then let's talk trains, then let's talk buses, and figure out where the investment needs to be there, at an appropriate level? Because we need public transit, we need that kind of thing, but not at the levels they're talking about. My little town of Mill Creek is about 20,000 population. I figure out how many buses we have come through our little 3 square mile thing every single day, but they've created a huge amount of congestion and they're all empty because nobody's using them. So this is the issue: is it's not that they don't have enough money, as you correctly call out. It's that they're spending it in the wrong places, and then they turn around to us and say, "Oh, we can't afford to keep criminals in jail because we can't pay the bills," and yet they went and spent a bunch of money on DEI and hiring 8,000 new employees to state government since COVID started.
Absolutely right. And speaking of transportation, I'm working on our next report card for Washington, which we're going to have soon on transportation. A little preview for you guys listening. A great statistic that feeds exactly into the point you're making. Since 2012, transit revenue has increased 83% and ridership has decreased 37%. Okay. So the money they're getting is almost like doubled, almost 100% increase. And the number of people it's serving is going down. And that's, the joke about the two kinds of government programs, the kinds that are so successful so they need more money, and the kinds that aren't successful so they need more money
Right.
to work, right? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about one potential sort of tax increase, more of a price increase with the rent control. But before we do that, we did have a question, and this is a little bit on the spot, but you're a savvy guy, so you might know this one. We're getting asked about the status of the different firearm bills. Do you know where any of those are in terms of passage or down the line, or
I
if there's
don't.
been progress?
Yeah, I don't recall. The one that I do remember right now is the permitting bill that was voted out on Saturday. That's left the House. That's a bill that basically requires you to get a permit before you can purchase a gun. And then the original bill, and it may have been modified. I know there were a bunch of amendments that were rejected, but the original bill had it so that if you purchased a gun and then let your permit expire, then the local county sheriff could come and collect that gun from you. To get a permit, you had to do a day's training with live fire included. So that was voted off the floor. It's totally unconstitutional. I don't see how this is going to stick, but somebody's going to end up going through the pain. And then there's some tax increases that go along with that on there's another bill for tax increases on ammo and the actual licenses themselves. The permit itself is so nebulous. In order to get a permit, you would have to do live fire, but you can't get a gun until you got the permit. So now you got to borrow a gun from somebody. So there's a whole bunch of basically it's banning this. There's a provision in there for concealed carry on another bill for uh, locations that you can go basically if there's a child and anywhere near you. So if you're standing there on the side of the street and a kid walks past you, what are you supposed to do? And then there's a safe storage provision too, which I don't recall the status on that, which was an opaque box that had to be secured in your vehicle. Glove compartment doesn't do it, and then you are liable as you can be prosecuted for felony if a criminal breaks into your car and then runs out and shoots grandma.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, right. I agree. It makes me, I mean, it makes me grateful to have my like concealed permit, but you're like, this is effectively removing us as an open carry state. You know, like what they're trying to do here.
Yeah,
I'm
and
curious
I'm
if any.
sorry I don't have the latest status. I'm tracking all of the financial bills, and there's
Yeah.
thousands of
Well, on
them.
this, I was going to say
So,
this was on the spot, so I appreciate the way in there. One more question before we move on. When it comes to the budget increases due to boosting employee hires, has any assessment been done regarding how many state employees reside outside of Washington, paying for state salaries that aren't a direct benefit to our state's economy?
ooh, that's a fantastic question, and a simple PRA will show that to us. I don't know how many folks are out of the state. You're thinking obviously about remote employees and requiring them to come back into the office. That would be quite an excellent uh, exercise, I suspect, to find out. So yeah, I'll try and find that out. That's really interesting. I do know that I've been doing some work with the Employment Security Department on the backlogs that they have. If you call in, it can be 20, 30 minutes to get through. And I'm trying to find out how many employees they have manning the phones and how many phone calls they actually answer. I've got one piece of that. 420 is the average per day that are on the phone. So you'd think they'd be able to answer several thousand phone calls a day without too much trouble. So we're going to find out about that. But it's the same principle. It's are the government workers actually working or not?
Exactly.
But I'll try and find that out. That's a real interesting question.
Well, I'm going to be asking you, Mark, what 5 things you accomplished this week is at the end. So be ready for that a doozy of of a question. Okay, so let's talk about a bad bill that the House just passed and something you've written about quite a bit. Um, let's look at the current state of it and where it's headed and what it's going to do. This, of course, is House Bill 1217, which it aims to keep rents low, but would in fact do the opposite. What is your what is the status of this bill? What does it do, and where does it look like it's going?
Yeah, 1217 was passed out by the House. The Republicans put about 80 amendments or so on it, and the majority were rejected using a procedural move, basically a scoped move to get rid of them all, which is ridiculous. So basically, it's rent control. So what it does is it says if you own a property, you cannot increase your rent more than 7% per year. And if you increase more than 3%, there are certain requirements and notification things you have to do to your with your tenants, so that they have plenty of notice that they if they choose to leave or not. Now, there's no penalty for the tenant if you notify them. It's going to be 4%. Incidentally, the property tax increase in King County this year was 5.2%, or last year. So you're going to blow past that 3% pretty quick. And if you don't, they can just walk out and terminate the lease. And then you've got all the eviction problems that come with that, and lowering of fees, like reducing the pet damage fees and this kind of thing. And well, basically, it will destroy the rental market because what you get is, I mean, all the folks that are for this will say, well, rents are going up too much. Well, let's talk about what we need to do to fix that. But this isn't the right way to do it, because all you're going to do is have a property owner, the roof leaks, you need a new roof on the property. So you replace the roof, and then you want to recoup the cost of that replacement on this rental property. And so you have to increase rent. Well, that's going to drive your rent up. So suddenly now you lose your tenant and everything gets worse, or and you capped at 7%. So in today's market, what happens is, if you're a property owner and you get a good renter in your property, excuse me, you're likely not to increase their rent or keep the increases as low as possible because you like them in the property. They're a good renter. They're not trashing the walls or the the toilets or whatever, and destroying the house. They're taking care of it. And I know lots of people that do this. And I know lots of property owners that do this too. They keep their rents deliberately low because they want to encourage that person to stay in that property. Well, that's out the window, because now I don't know next year if all the appliances are going to fail. I don't know next year if I'm going to get a leak that isn't insured. I don't know next year if I need to do some major maintenance. So I'm going to have to get as much money as I can now to cover that eventuality in the future. So you're going to get 7% increases pretty much guaranteed every single year. So the short-term gain you get as a renter will be gone within a few years, and they will all be screaming, rent went up.
Well, it's exactly right, and I think I've mentioned this before because this is just it's just such an obvious example. But I've rented for many years. I'm now fortunately a home owner, but when I was renting, my first moving out from my parents, I bundled with three other guys. We rented a house in Newcastle, and we were renting from a small landowner, like not one of these like big conglomerates who owned a million places. It was, I think her and her husband maybe had like three properties total, something like that. We were all very responsible, very communicative. We got along. They would come by, once or twice a year to do some like basic outside maintenance and like roof cleaning and things like that. And we were responsible for the inside. And every year they increased our rent. I believe I want to say like it was, I don't remember off the top of my head, something around 2,300 a month. And then it was increased every year by $50. $50. And again, split four ways, right? Because there were four of us living there. And it was amazing. We were responsible to her and she was communicative with us. We never felt like we had to hide anything, because a lot of the problems that people will talk about is, oh, these predatory rental companies, that you report something that's broken and then they're going to raise your rents, and this is what we're trying to protect against. Well, now you're driving these people out who you can be transparent with. You're driving out the people who have incentive to keep the cost low, like you're talking about. And now you're only going to have the big companies who don't have that one-on-one attention, who don't care in the same direction. You're driving out the very good people that you want to incentivize to be in this market by capping these rents. And then talk about, and then let me ask you this, because from my understanding, what it seems like is very likely is, let's say, let's say best case scenario, you've just refurbished a property. You've got new appliances, you've got new roof. Nothing is going to go wrong. Well, you're still now worried that there's going to be property tax increases because the legislature has decided to increase the cap on what property taxes can be raised. So you want to raise your rates more than this, limit. So you alert your tenant and they say, "I'm out of here." Well, now, as the property owner, can't you just raise your rent to whatever you want it to be higher? You're no longer bound by a cap increase because it's newly fresh on the market. Is am I misunderstanding that?
No, no, you could certainly do that. And there was some talk about, and I even saw some legislation about this. I don't recall if it got through and was dropped, where you couldn't do it for a year after the tenant left either. So, they were trying to get around that issue.
Yeah.
But you're right. Let's say you're renting a place for $2,000 a month, and your property tax on that house is, I don't know, says $5,000, and your property tax goes up $1,000 that year, which is not unheard of. And suddenly you're looking at recouping 100. Let's call it 1,200. Make the math easy. So you're looking at an increase of $100. That's a 10%. That's a 5% increase on the rent. Well, boom, you went right past the 3%. They can now walk away from this, and so you're going to increase the rent by 5% plus anything else you want to do. And there was talk about even exempting property taxes because the government's the one that sets the cap, and then the government's the one that increases the taxes on the other hand. So they got controls, they're both controls here, and it's a horrible situation to be in. Just ask a sub agent, those folks you buy your taps from. Government sets the prices, but they don't set the market on labor costs, so they're always getting pinched as well, believe it or not. But the when they do that, they wouldn't even exempt that. So if you could, if you did rent control with uh, exempting taxes and fees for replacement costs, at least that would seem somewhat that you could control it that way. But it's not going to work. So bad idea. They're pushing it through because they believe it's going to work. And Yeah, I just think what's going to happen is the conglomerates will continue to succeed because they can spread the financial burden across multiple properties. Mom and pop, or the family that was lucky enough to be able to get out of their first home and maybe get into a second home and rent the first home, which is a majority of the property in Washington State, they're going to be like, ah, we're out. And plus, you throw in the eviction process and how hard that is and how much they can really screw your finances up. In King County, it's up to a year's delay. Why aren't they hiring more judges to help adjudicate that? Why aren't they reducing the cost of this housing in the first place by streamlining permitting and reducing the amount of regulations and oversight? When you're looking at $40,000 added just in permit fees to the average house, I'm built a well and or I tapped into a well on a property that I have on a piece of land, and my fees are at 8 grand or something ridiculous just to use the water on my property. Why? What did I get for that? A piece of paper? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, well, to sort of to one of the questions that came in here, it's kind of long, so I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but the gist of the question is, are people who advocate for this bill and some others in the legislature, are they actually just sort of this dense to realize to not realize things like rent control has been extensively studied and has failed everywhere? I mean, I can't remember, was it Germany or France that had, I think it was Germany, had a massive national rent control that they had to end after a year because it was so disastrous and terrible for their market. It's not like this is some novel idea. Is this, again, is this just a matter of ignorance? Is it a matter of ideology? Is it a matter of ulterior motive? What drives this bill to get this far when it seems like the solution, or at least the non-solution that it is so apparent in the public?
Donald, communism will work here this time. Don't you know that? It's not worked anywhere else, but it'll work here. It's the same principle. I think there's some folks that fundamentally understand this is a wealth shift. They penalize these evil property owners that are making millions and millions of dollars, which they aren't. They're making a small amount of money. Then they'll claim that they're making money on the appreciation of the property, which is being driven, incidentally, by high rents and the high cost of building homes. So there is some naivety there, I think. But they always think, politicians do this all the time. They always think that they've got the solution, even though it's never worked before. They can make a change and it's going to work this time. But fundamental economics say if you restrict the price of something like this, either you and there's a demand in this case that you cannot reduce, then you're going to drive up the cost. It's demand and supply. And so they're trying to put a cap on that. It doesn't matter. Free market won't support this kind of stuff and it will fail. So if they run this out, you'll see a couple, 3 years probably, just like you saw in some of these other countries. It's somewhat similar to social, uh, the, uh, someone like some of the social housing stuff that's out there, but where the government controls the social housing. And I had my grandparents lived in social housing and they become slums eventually because the property owner, in this case the government, can't reinvest money into those properties. So and they become slums. And so when they converted those to private, they got a lot better. So this is not going to work. It'll take a couple of years for them to realize it, and then they'll have to repeal it, or as our state legislature does now, it tries to tweak stuff until the thing actually dies.
Yeah, well, and I feel bad in particular if this goes through forward. Hopefully, the Senate will not pass this, or Governor Ferguson will not sign it. We don't know what the end result there is. But it makes me feel really bad for young college graduates and young
Hmm.
people starting out because again, like I said, I was renting for a few years and it was even I was probably moving out like 2016 through 2018, 2019. That was when I was renting, and it was competitive to find places, particularly in King County, that were affordable and nice and easily within distance to commute to somewhere like Seattle. Um, and all of these things, and you needed every advantage you could get if you were willing to say sign a multi-year lease, for instance. That was something that tenants would like because it guaranteed them a space for multiple years, and the renters, or excuse me, the rental property owners liked because it guaranteed them that source of income. But of course, that's no longer going to be on the table. If at any point they need to increase, you can just walk out, right? If you remove that as an option on the table, you've now made one less tool for people who are good tenants trying to get an affordable spot, one less offering they can bring to the table. And so I mean, I'm just thinking about my own experience and going to these places and putting in these applications and losing out and that desperation, like I need somewhere to live. That's only going to get worse. And so it's really not a compassionate thing to do in the name of a compassionate policy. Well,
Yeah, you're right.
I'm sorry. Looks like there's two more questions before we sign off here. Um, let me see here, or maybe just one that looks like one's a comment here. But many people of means are leaving Washington State for states like Idaho, which has an estate tax exemption that matches the federal $13.5 million exemption. Washington State is currently a 2.1 million exemption. So if you have an estate move to Idaho, you can protect your estate from a huge tax. Not a question there, but yeah, is there? I mean, based on the number of tax increases and things, there's no conversation about like matching exemptions or anything like that for our estate. Is if anything, maybe moving in the other direction. Is there any talk about that?
There was a bill that I don't think is going to go through that increased the exemption from 2.1, I think it is, or
Yeah,
just over 2, up
2.1.
to
Yeah,
around 3 million. I don't think that bill's moving. So that's a shame. But you're right. That would be actually a relatively simple issue. Solution is just exempt the first 10 or 30 or whatever the number is, million, do the analysis and we'll figure it out. And then the folks that, you're a business owner, your business is your retirement fund. So when the state comes in and does a 7% cap gains on it, and right now it's exempt because it's your primary business as a small business owner, but that won't last long. So if they start doing that, then you just move your business somewhere else. And this is the fluidity of of capital. You can move this money to different states. You only need to be there for 181 days. So you can move to a tax-free state, South Dakota, or one of the other states that you can register in, live there, take residency, and at 181 days sell the business, and then you're not subject to Washington state tax. This is the short-sightedness. A lot of the politicians, we've seen this with Bezos. He took his money to Florida, because he can, and he doesn't even have to sell his stuff here. He can just go buy it over there. But you'll see that happen. So Washington could do that. They could create an exemption in the estate tax for a much larger amount, and also a income tax on the sale of your primary residence and some other stuff too. And they would solve the issue of folks leaving the state to avoid some of these taxes on the sale and death, and allow the retirees to stay here and live here. So there are some simple fixes for this, but I don't know if they're going to entertain them, given the 20 taxes we found so far
right.
that they're increasing this year.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's maybe important to note that of the 20 that Mark has written and posted in that blog, there are still others. These are maybe your top 20 that you can find, and I'm sure there's even more that we
Yeah,
can.
we ran out of electrons on our website to cover all the taxes.
Yeah. Well, we were gonna expand our capacity, but it was taxed at too high a percent. We couldn't increase without our website domain kicking us out. So. Um, Lastly, is this a banner year for bad ideas in the legislature, or is it par for the course? What's your take?
I definitely think this year, because of the supermajorities, there's a more uh, just they threw caution to the wind, and have gone for pretty much everything they wanted to do. Is it all going to pass? No, it's not all going to pass. But you can see some of the really bad stuff like rent control and some of the other things we've come through. We talked about the gun stuff earlier today. It's not something we follow as an organization closely, but these things are where they have those majorities. They've definitely done that. So yeah, I think it is banning it. Just look at the number of bills they've introduced, and the fact that if they get all the tax increases they want, we're going to be over 80 billion in our biannual budget. When I left office, there's no correlation. When I left office, we were at 42 billion. And so in the space of what, 8 years, they've almost doubled it, doubled
Wow.
the state revenue, just 8 years.
Okay.
Unbelievable.
We questions are pouring in, two more, and then we're gonna call it because we got to cut.
Okay.
Let you guys get back to lunch, and Mark's got important work to do as well. But first, do you see a mass exodus out of Washington? I don't know if you've looked at any of the moving numbers or not. I don't have them off the top of my head. I don't know if you've heard of any of data there.
Yeah, there is a net exodus of Washington natives, where you are seeing an influx of foreign nationals. I'm English too. I am a foreign national, obviously originally now an American, but it's not. And I think because of Microsoft and Amazon, Boeing, Starbucks, some of our other big employers here in the region, we're somewhat insulated from that diversion. But we are seeing folks leave Washington for Idaho, Utah, not so much Colorado, huge migration into Arizona. I don't know if that's retirees specifically. I didn't look at the demographics there, but the net Paul Guppy has done some research. He does an annual report on the net migration, but we're seeing people leave the state, particularly Seattle, obviously.
Yeah, well, I would feel, a little bit more comfortable if the people coming in weren't, calling us the colonies, like you said, or foreign nationals referring to us as the colonies still scares me.
I'm
So I'm
not biting on that one, Donald.
okay. All right. And lastly, is there any update on the simple majority ending debate policy? I know that they had, at least earlier in the session, they had done something where they had stopped the 2/3 majority requirement for ending debate. Has that changed at all? Is that still in effect? Or
That's still in effect. They put that into the rules at the beginning of session. So that's still in effect, unfortunately.
and is that something that would carry on to the next future sessions, or is that something that would have to be renewed every legislative session?
The rules are adopted at the beginning of session, typically in the first session of the session, first meeting of the session. So they could choose to remove it next time. But traditionally you take last year's rules and you re-adopt them.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for all of that, Mark. Really appreciate it. Keep up the good work, and hopefully, we will after tomorrow see a lot of these taxes die, and hopefully, not many of them make it far beyond that.
That's my hope.
All right. Thanks so much. Thank you
Thanks.
guys all for attending this on the go. As a reminder, we upload these to YouTube. So if you're watching, give our channel a like and a subscribe. It really, really does help us get our message out there. We've been super blessed by the influx of views and support that we've seen. So please go ahead and do that. And like I said, if you're watching this live, this will be on our YouTube channel. You can find us at Washington Policy Center on YouTube, and share it with your friends. Sign up for our newsletter where we are emailing you just about once a week with these latest in the legislature, the latest policies, latest bills, the most important information that you need to know. It's a really easy way to digest the news. We try to only, give you the most important stuff. We're not spamming you. And you also can get Paul's weekly update video every Saturday from that same email list, where he goes over what's happened in the last week. And that's always a very highly popular series. So thank you again, and make sure to join us next week on Washington Policy on the Go.